Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sergey.
Yep. Excellent, excellent. Morning, everyone. I'm Sergey Samolis. I'm the key presenter today, and welcome everyone to the series of educational webinars on public-private partnerships organized by the Black Sea Trade and Development Bank. First, I would like to invite Vasilis Christakis from BSTDB to give a short introduction to our first session. Vasilis, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sergey. Hello, Sergey and Remir. Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much to Veronica, Elena, and Dimitri Vasilenko for organizing this. And welcome to all the PPP authorities who have taken the time to join this educational initiative. And welcome to my colleagues from the bank who have also been kind enough to join in today with their expertise. Our bank is a regional development bank. Our bank is founded 20 years ago. It is a part of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Network, but it is a regional development institution which provides both public sector and private sector financing. It has been doing so successfully for 20 years. Our portfolio is about 2 billion right now, and we have been steadily rated about A2 from Moody's. We give financing to our clients directly or through financial intermediaries. And we seek through our financing to promote integration cooperation in the Black Sea area. You can find a lot about our bank in our website. And I invite all of the authorities who are interested to contact us, as we are very much interested in infrastructure financing right now. But we're moving beyond that. We want to do more, not just provide money. So we are taking the initiative, like this one here, to provide project promotion opportunities and educational opportunities and networking opportunities among professionals in the development institutions, professionals in the PPP and investment authorities of our countries. For this reason, we partnered about a year ago with the Russian PPP Center, and we have undertaken an ambitious initiative to create a central information hub. This is a website called pppblacksea.com, which has various goals. Its most important goal is to showcase best practices in PPPs and investment projects, to promote new projects coming up, to show them and make them available for financiers, for contractors, for consultants to join in, and thus help the variety of participants in investment projects in all our Black Sea region. This site is coming up in about a month, and we want to thank very much all the PPP authorities which have provided projects actively and help us populate the site. From now on, you'll be able to do it directly yourselves with access keys that will be given by the center, and you'll be able to post and update your projects and keep the relationship going. For example, if a financier or a contractor or a consultant would like to participate in one of your projects in some way, then through the PPP Center, they will contact you or contact the BSTDB if there is a need for financing or co-financing. In this site, you will also find information about PPP practices in our member states, about international trends, and also a roster of international experts that you can contact in case of specialist assistance needed. Now, without further ado, I would like to open this educational seminar, welcome all the authorities again, and thank our trainers. This is a highly specialized and professional training, in-depth. It will be taking place in 5 separate sessions starting today until next Friday, every 2 days from 11 to 1:30 daily. But I would like, last but not least, to mention that both this educational initiative and the site have been made possible through the Black Sea Project Promotion Facility. This is a technical assistance fund provided by the Russian Federation. And I would like to wholeheartedly thank, on behalf of the bank, the steering committee of this facility, its manager, Mr. Gorelik, who is here with us today, and of course, the Russian Federation, who is the donor of all this. Thank you, welcome, and I wish you a very exciting intellectual journey. Over to you, Sergey.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vasilis. I was listening with great interest. And it's really exciting to see the international financial institutions like the BSTDB moving above from their traditional products of lending and perhaps some equity investment to advisory, to education, and what we see a lot these days with many development institutions dealing more with the what they call the upstream part of the projects.
Right.
In infrastructure, dealing with the public authorities. So it's very encouraging to see this initiative happening. So let me first move to some housekeeping points to make sure that we set the rules of engagement for this training, and then I will introduce myself and introduce the agenda of this program. So as Vasilis said, the sessions start every day at 11 Thessaloniki time, Moscow time, 10 a.m. Central European time. Duration of each session is 2.5 hours. There will be 5 of them, 2 this week, next one on Friday, and Monday, Wednesday, and Friday next week. So though the second bullet says, please keep your webcam switched off, but actually you're welcome to keep your webcam switched on. The material point is to have your microphone muted. We'll try to approach interaction in this format as more of chat-based. So you have the chat window. Please feel free to type any of your questions. And you see my co-presenter, Remir Mukumov, in one of the webcam pictures. He's monitoring all your chats, all your questions live. And if there is something to focus on during this session, he will ask this question and we'll focus on your question. But every session we will have at least 15 minutes or perhaps more at the end of the session for questions and answers. And apart from Q&A, it would be really exciting to have your experience from the projects you are involved in or from the PPP framework activities that you're involved in to illustrate or to actually to argue the points your presenter is making. And in terms of experience, I saw the impressive list of participants from all BSTDB member countries, quite a few people from the bank team, quite a few people from the National PPP Center of Russia. So whilst I keep introducing the housekeeping points, can I ask you, in your chat windows, just please type how many years of experience with PPPs do you have? Basically, just a number would be okay. And experience is anything: legislative work, advisory, banking, your professional involvement of PPPs. It would be interesting for all of us, helpful for me to see what level of experience we have in the group. So moving on. All presentations will be provided via email upon course completion. So not to have you stressed and taking lots of notes, copying the presentation. You will have the PDFs with all the files, either following a session or in one bunch after all 5 days. And feel free, but if education is high on the agenda of BSTDB, and for all of us, your presenters, it's something we do professionally. So please do not hesitate to let us know what your interests are in terms of PPP project finance training. What are the topics you would love to study, and it will help us to streamline our course portfolio. And perhaps there is something ready for you now, and it would be good to offer something that you could benefit from. So if you have any questions, make sure to write them in the chat. Try not to just put on the mic and speak. Start with a message in the chat window. So this, as Vasilis introduced, this series of seminars, probably they are too long to call them webinars. 2.5 hours is pretty long time. It's a full session on these topics that you can see here, and the whole program was arranged by Black Sea Trade Development Bank, as you realized, with the generous financial support of the Russian Federation government. And as I understand, the BSTDB is partnering with the Russian National Center for PPPs, who invited me and Remir as course presenters. We're not employees of the National, though we have some history of collaborating with it. And so these are the 5 topics that we will cover during this program. The one for today is PPP concept and key PPP models. The next one on Friday will be taken by Remir, PPP framework and PPP project cycle, primarily at the early stages of the project cycle of PPP, of project identification, assessment, and everything to do with bidding, something probably of most interest to the public authorities participants. Topic 3, financing, one of the more difficult, intensive, skills-based aspects that we, from my experience, always generates a lot of interest. And I believe we'll give you some pretty useful information to enhance your skill set, because even if you work in if you don't deal directly with finance, if you're a lawyer dealing with PPPs or a project manager, financing plays such an important role in PPPs, not just in terms of source of money, but all the incentives, the behavior of players are a lot driven by where the money comes from and how where the money comes from to invest in the project and how revenues are generated. So it's important to understand these dynamics. Session 4 will be on risk management and PPPs. It's also, risk management is not just a specialty area, it's a mindset that all professionals, let it be project managers, financiers, lawyers, advisors, they all need to have this risk management perspective. And PPPs, particularly very big projects, they have a lot of specific features that are not really covered even by professional certification programs like PMA or PRINCE2. So we'll share some pretty exclusive stuff on how mega projects are financed here. And so these 4 sessions will be delivered by my company, PPP Expertise Eurasia. And the 5th one, Private Infrastructure Investments, Common Challenges and Trends, will be introduced by Artyom Volodkin from the National PPP Center. And it will, I believe it will dwell on what's happening in your countries, because I believe the National PPP Center analysts brought together the picture of where private investment in infrastructure is in these TDP member countries. What are the common features? What are the unique ones in countries? And what the trends are. Now, that session is, I believe, will be very exciting and dynamic with lots of interaction, and you will have to do some work as well. So I'm looking at the chat screen with not that many responses yet, but we already can see that we have participants with some 10 years experience in the field, as well as people with just who are new to the PPP area, and as such having just 1 year of experience. So all sessions are based on the assumption that anyone who is totally new to PPPs would be able to follow, but I believe that even very experienced professionals would benefit, because that's the area where you keep educating yourself. The legal framework keeps changing. The infrastructure technologies change, infrastructure demand changes a lot. And of course, events like the COVID pandemic, they influenced a lot the way infrastructure is financed, and what we see now, international financial institutions looking for the upstream part of projects is also a new development. So I believe everyone would gain something new and interesting from this course. So these are the three faces you will see a lot these days. The one on the left is me. Picture was taken some 5-6 years ago. The second presenter is Remir Mukumov. And
hello, everyone. Hello.
Remir. And Artyom will join us and lead the session on Friday. So let me first tell you what this company is, PPP Expertise Eurasia. It's a spin-off, and now it's an independent company from PPP Experts Group, UK-based, and I'm talking to you from London now, which was in the field of PPP advisory, education, and conference management since 2011. And you can see this brochure is an illustration of many courses that the company ran globally. And the company, we collaborated with the National Center of PPP Center of Russia for a long time. This is a brochure of a course delivered by PPP experts in Moscow in 2013. It is in Russian. You can see the logo of PPP experts and the logo of the P3 Institute that the National Center run this program in. And this is the corporate collaboration since 2013. And since 2010, I personally was it was the year that the National PPP Center was set up. I was a member of the executive board for a long time until I moved to the UK. So that's to say that we know each other quite a long time. And I can genuinely say that I have a great deal of respect, and I would say admire the National Center for PPPs. I think it is probably the largest NGO PPP focused in the world, just by the number of participants and by the role it plays in the Russian market, and by the intellectual product they produce, all the reports, all the educational programs. And I don't know any other location in the world where you have a PPP week, a 1-week conference live with hundreds of participants with parallel sessions, all organized by the National Center for PPPs. Of course, Russia is a big country, but it also takes a very good team to generate such an interest and produce so much value added to the PPP field. So that's a lot of praise for the National Center. Then moving back to what my company does, PPP Experts taught a lot of people from different countries. This picture was taken in Uzbekistan. You can see that's me in the center, that's Remir on the left, in 2018, and people with diplomas program organized by IFC. That's the IFC person in a shirt. And very importantly, we are an accredited training organization for certified PPP training. That's something I believe you all could be interested, and I'll tell you next about the program. So this photo is an online mode of delivery. Again, many of these people from Uzbekistan, they moved to the second level of the certified program. And it was when the lockdown happened and the program had to be restructured into an online delivery mode. And you can see the happy faces probably signify that these people just passed the exam and everyone passed it successfully. So we are proud to have 100% exam success from across various levels of this program. And we work a lot with international financial institutions. We had World Bank, EBRD, IFC, ADB as our clients, and happy to keep working with them. So these are the structure of the programs we offer. Well, I just want to highlight the different roles that we believe that PPP knowledge could be structured along. So you would see that anyone in the PPP field should have a fair understanding of what PPPs are fundamentally, but then the key roles we believe are policy people, a lot like people present today, working in different ministries, perhaps Ministry of Finance, Development, Ministry for Economy, and different structural sectoral ministries, Ministry for Transport, Healthcare, Education, people who deal with framework for policy setting and making sure that policy is met, and the management function, people who deal with projects specifically, with procuring projects, with managing projects. And then these two professional areas which are prominent in PPP is very important. And every PPP would require a lot of professional input in the finance area and in the legal aspects, because the network of PPP contracts, it usually is not just one agreement. It's a web of agreements, and of course there is a specialized area of PPP law and a lot to learn in that respect. So in terms of who your presenter is, I believe the essential point is I mainly worked, I've been with PPPs and infrastructure for 15 years and mainly with banks. So I started as an advisor and worked for an equity investment company in Russia dealing with infrastructure assets. But after that, for about 10 years, I was with financing PPPs. So my latest position was with head of infrastructure financing of Sberbank, probably the largest bank of all member countries of BSTDB. And in terms of education, I would just highlight one point. This MSc in Major Program Management, that's a cutting edge area of management of major projects. I'll be happy to share some of this knowledge, which is cutting edge in terms of mega project management. So moving to, this initiative, which is arranged for you by BSTDB, it is, I see it as an element of this big drive for standardization of PPP knowledge, because I think for those of you who were in the PPP area for quite a while, I'm sure that initially you must have had this a few years of confusion. So what are these terms? Are concessions PPPs? What is PPP and PFI? Are they synonyms or different terms? Does there have to be a PPP law? Are there 4 or 6 or 5 or how many stages in the PPP process cycle? Until recently, I would say every big player had his own guidelines on PPPs and try to set the rules of and the terminology on their own. So there was this drive to bring together the knowledge, and the logos you see here is probably the best of the comprehensive programs on PPP. Something you could study, like a course longer than this one, and you can see notable efforts is, let's say, World Bank came up with this public-private partnerships course, which was first delivered via their own website and then via Coursera, the open access platform. And I think it is still available on Coursera, and you can find it on YouTube. A quite useful a course with lots of interviews with PPP professionals. There was a very nice job done by United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific to put together a short manual on PPPs accompanied by a course. Very succinct and very good graphics. So it's public domain, and we used some of their graphics, some of the imagery for this course. Howard Kennedy School has a very prominent course in private investment in infrastructure, 2-week residential course in Harvard, which is aimed at higher echelons of primarily of public sector participants. So if anyone, by the way, if anyone was to the Harvard Kennedy School course, please type it in the chat, because I know World Bank, IFC sometimes financed public sector participants to attend a shorter version of this course. So finally, about 7 years ago, the G20 and had this infrastructure high on its agenda, and one of the themes for G20 was bringing together the PPP knowledge, so that you can see that this group of banks, some of the most active banks in the infrastructure space, Asian Development Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction Development, Inter-American Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, World Bank Group, including IFC, they came up with, financed by the Project Preparation Infrastructure Advisory Facility, to arrange a course that would become a global standard for PPPs. So they had a tender to select this organization, Association of Project Management Group International, a UK-based company, APMG International, to put together a body of knowledge, something those of you who are from the project finance, project management domain, it's the analysis of PMBOK, Project Management International Manual. So they came up with a document that you can find online in 8 volumes. So these volumes were written by professionals chosen by prominent professionals chosen by APMG, and mastering the knowledge of all these 8 areas would lead you to a recognition as a CP3P, Certified PPP Professional. So you could see here the structure of this exam. You have to take the foundation exam, after which you can go either for preparation or for the execution. If you only need one of them, preparation is primarily for people who work on the project inception stage up to, I would say, financial completion. And execution is more for people who deal with the management of a PPP contract, the construction and the operation stage. And if you take all three exams, you have this the credential CP3P, which is your professional certification. So after each exam, you get one of these little blue plaques, which you could add to your CV. You would see the way the PPP knowledge is structured. Foundations, how a framework works, so how the PPP projects are identified and screened, appraised, what happens after the public authority is developing, structuring documents and conducting a tender and moving to contract, and then you're tendering and awarding the contract up to commercial and financial completion, then your construction and operation stages. So we see a lot that these days advisors, when they look for work with on IFI's mandates in infrastructure, they would have a requirement of being a CP3P professional, and the IFIs will also see that when they consider what projects to support in countries, one of the requirements is, at least information requirements, is to tell how many certified professionals, or at least those who have this foundation level, are in this respective public sector authority, to make sure that your BSTDB of the world, your World Bank, EBRD people, they are confident that their counterparts on the public side are knowledgeable about PPPs, because otherwise you could bring together a great team of private investors, excellent team of consultants, financiers, but the bottleneck would be your public sector capacity. Public sector professionals would know a lot about construction materials, a lot about tariffs, but probably would not know much about PPPs structurally, about financing, and about the legal aspects of PPPs. So your foundation level has these 10 areas. You can have a look at those, and we believe this is the trend, and encourage everyone to consider taking the foundation course, and then quite often for high level public sector professionals that's sufficient, but for people who have more detailed hands-on the projects, they would really benefit from taking all three courses. So just moving now to PPP concepts and key PPP models, the theme of today's session. So as we mentioned before this drive for standardization of knowledge, there was no consensus on what PPPs are. There is still a wealth of definitions of what a PPP is, public-private partnership. I remember when in Russia, the first PPP concession deals that started being developed in 2005, and the concept captured the imagination of many people in the investment community. There were a few years of debate whether it's public-private or private-public. Just conceptually, it took a few years to understand what's the key, what are the key features of this concept. So you would see that all these very respectable institutions, they have their own manuals on PPPs. They have their definitions, which are different. I wouldn't go into detail of analyzing them, but you can imagine if you have the European Commission, which pretty much tells the EU member state, regulates a lot how PPPs are done, and regulates statistical treatment of PPPs. And you have Standard & Poor's, which may have a different approach to PPPs, and they give rating to PPP projects which are based on a different understanding. It could sometimes lead to discrepancies in statistical treatment, in understanding what projects are qualified as PPPs, which are not, which of the projects will lead to, they have to be recorded in the national accounting. Do they affect the public sector borrowing capacity? So I couldn't overestimate the drive for a common terminology, common standards on PPPs. So we sort of pretty much have an instinctive notion. Okay, PPP, it is about infrastructure, about doing it not the traditional way, but having a private involvement. But then it's important to get to the detail. What kind of private involvement, and why do we do this? Why is this a drive for infrastructure which is built environment that enables activity for either social infrastructure, so the built environment which helps to provide services important for people, healthcare, education, etc., and the economic infrastructure, the built environment that helps business conduct what they do, roads and seaports and airlines. They're considered economic infrastructure, though of course individuals use them a lot. So why private participation in infrastructure? Well, the challenges, the reasons it is considered that public sector is not always the optimal solution is first to do with with both stages of a project. The construction, so public sector is often criticized for long delays, cost overruns, time delays in launch of products, and particularly of large-scale assets. And there's no better example than Olympic Games. Olympic Games as a mega event, mega project. Not a single Olympic game was delivered to budget, and quality is sometimes quite often an issue. Inadequate maintenance, that's something that, again, there is no ownership as such in a traditional approach. There are volumes of literature and PhD dissertations on benefits and strong pros and cons of public versus private approaches to investment. But one of the things which, not so many things are very definite, but one which is quite definite is financial incentives are stronger than, are probably the strongest. So maintenance, if you have your skin in the game, if the party responsible for maintenance has financial interest, has money to lose, if they don't do their work well, this is a very strong incentive. This is the reason for private sector to be involved. So efficiency of the delivery of the public services. So this area has to do with constructing the asset, but what about the service? We understand that the asset is one aspect, the service is the other. So the point is private sector capacity to deliver services more efficiently and cheaply than the public sector. That is, again, statistically proven, and you can, as as many of individuals, you could expect, let's say, a private healthcare center, private clinic. You would expect more from it than on average, than from a public sector one, because there is financial incentive, because it's likely that doctors that work in this clinic are better paid. It's likely that they're financially more responsible for their quality of treatment. And that probably drives better professionals. Probably the labs, the equipment are to a higher standard. And you would expect the private sector to go out of their way to do more to make sure that they have their clients happy and paying. And of course, the most obvious reason is lack of available budgets. Many countries, particularly the lower income countries, probably would not start with thinking of quality of public services. All of the project management aspects, but it's just you have no money. And if you don't have, if your Ministry of Education doesn't have a budget to build a new school, but the population is growing and there is a building up pressure on building more schools and investing more in education, sometimes you have no alternative but to go for like a concession. That's why in many countries, concessions are the first mode of PPPs that starts, because it's easier to start with a project where, as a public sector, you don't invest anything. You have just the private investor coming and bringing the funds to build an asset. So there's a good case to build to have private involvement in infrastructure. Though of course we understand, and in the term public-private partnership, the word public does come first, because infrastructure remains responsibility of the public sector. It is the government which takes a lot of responsibility for the well-being, for safety, for healthcare, for education standards, and for the upkeep of roads. For many of that, the government is still responsible, but the way to procure the assets and the service could be more efficient. So I would love to ask you, all participants, so in your chats, so you see these three points, three reasons for having PPPs. One is, I would say, better assets. So constructing the assets, the hospitals, the airports, more efficiently, constructing them to budget and within time frame. The second reason is better services. And the third one is just say financial aspects, less budget spending. So which of the three do you believe is more important? Construction, services, or budget? Let's say that's construction, services, budget. Just drop one of these three words for me, and it's interesting to see how you feel about it. So moving on, so the definition. So we discussed that many different public authorities have different definitions, and many international authorities. So let's say this one says, first of all, we talk about infrastructure. So these, we already touched that. So these little pictures, they say, we're talking about electricity, power, and we talk about roads, transportation, railways. We talk about social infrastructure, education, healthcare. Water is a huge sector for PPPs. So these days, there is a drive to apply the PPP model to pretty much everything, to agriculture, to IT, to defense projects. But it all really started with economic and social infrastructure. That's the key domain of PPPs. So public-private partnership is a long-term contract between a private party and the government agency for providing public services and or developing public infrastructure in which the private party bears significant risk and management responsibility. That's the definition which is used by the UN. Again, it could be somewhat different. If I wonder if anyone can capture one keyword which is not present here. So we have long-term, and there is of course a reason why PPPs are long-term. All of these assets, they cost a lot. They take a long time to build, and they cost a lot. And if we talk about a private investor, to get your money paid back, say in a concession, a typical toll road is likely to be 20, 30 years, is likely to take 20, 30 years time to pay back the investment. And very often the private party would not invest 100%. So there's a reason why they're long-term. Between a private party and a government agency, absolutely, the private party is very important. Sometimes you can talk about public-public partnerships. Sometimes there are programs of, for instance, government-to-government assistance when you have, or within a government when you have a public-owned, state-owned enterprise which does the work, but that's not usually considered a public-private partnership. So a private party, important for us with all the incentives, with all the skin in the game motivation that is present in a company, in a corporate establishment, with owners of this private party who would lose financially. That's the key thing. For providing public services, that's key. You don't talk about PPPs in, for instance, developing a new iPhone. It's not a public service. It's or you have privatizations. You have privately owned seaports. Yeah, absolutely. You can build a seaport in many nations, in many jurisdictions, which would be just your commercial risk. There would be no public responsibility for delivering the service involved. Probably some oversight, some regulation, but no responsibility to the public or to the corporate world. For providing services and developing public infrastructure, very often you would start with creating the infrastructure and sometimes providing public services. In many countries, like in the UK, which has the oldest history of PPPs, and the term PFI, Private Finance Initiative, comes from the UK. In the UK, it is not typical for say in healthcare, typical PFI project would not have the doctors coming from the private investor. Doctors would be National Health Service employees. So public services sometimes are an element of a PPP, sometimes not. Developing public infrastructure is more a usual element of a PPP, in which the private party bears significant risk and management responsibility. That's the key aspect, not present in every definition, but in this one very correctly is here. Risk is key for making sure that the benefits of PPPs are captured. It is very often the reason why you can obtain approval from your public sector hierarchy for a PPP. You would say, we shift the risk, we share the risk with the private side. So what's missing in this? For my taste, there's an obvious word missing in this presentation. It's word finance. So when we discussed, coming back to the previous slide, this lack of available budget. So, and I see that not so many feedback yet on, yeah, I can see Gaine and Anastasia, and I'm providing comments on which of these are more important. So funding, you captured by Gaine, and so financing could be here. And to be honest, you would expect a proper PPP, which sometimes they're called privately financed PPPs. You would expect it to have a private investor bringing his money. Yes, there are some PPPs which don't require upfront investments from the private party, but that's, I would say, not so many of them statistically, and they don't capture this advantage of skin in the game, of money at risk, your own money at risk. I had a discussion once with Ned Yescombe, the prominent author of books on PPPs and project finance, and asked him, do you believe, say, operational contracts, which sometimes some of them are classified as PPPs, but you don't have a private party coming with any capital investment. So are they PPPs? And his response was, well, if there is a strong discipline in terms of deductions, if the private operator loses financially, is penalized, is hit financially for underperformance, that could be a PPP. But the thing is, mentally, in behavior terms, it's a very different dynamics when you know that in future, when you don't do something well, you will get less. It's not such a strong incentive than when you already invested and you will not get it back. These are the same amount psychologically is perceived very differently. There is psychological research saying that on average, people feel 3 times more uncomfortable of losing, say, $10 rather than not finding $10. So an investment which you've made is a stronger incentive. So that was one of the ways to define PPPs. With an extra point that finance is essential. Then let's compare PPPs with traditional procurement. Let's compare them, look at these 4 key domains: funding, duration, output, input, risk. Basically, these all come from the definition. So, and from the features that we discussed. So funding, that's the traditional way, the way infrastructure is delivered traditionally. The public sector pays either upfront or contracts. It could be a private sector company, which is like just a construction company. It will be paid quite likely upfront, or it could be a more sophisticated way of contracting a construction company like an EPC contract. There could be milestone payments, but what's important is just the public sector paying and bearing all the risks. And risk is, we could take a long time discussing the concept of risk, and it will be an area of one of our further sessions. But basically, risk is an event that you have to pay for. So, events are your possible construction overruns, your possible operational extra expenses. So the public sector is responsible for it. They paid for the construction, and they are paying for the operation and maintenance of the road. So you see this yellow helmet is your construction workers. So they may be public sector, they may be private sector, but importantly, money, responsibility, and risk comes from the public sector. What the PPP allows us to do is to pay a private sector. So you have the public sector paying, having a contract to pay the private sector, but usually this missing element of the definition finance, there is no upfront payment by the state. That's for many, as we discussed, for many, particularly the less the less developed, the lower income countries, that's the deal breaker. You don't have money to build this hospital, but you can have a PPP contract, and the private party will come in and create it. You don't pay for it, but you pay over time. You pay over the lifetime of the projects, the tariffs, and you can see that this is a high level of cost to the government, because you have to pay the construction costs. It's not only the tariffs, but either the government or the users, they pay not just for operation and upkeep maintenance of an asset, but also they have to pay back the construction costs, and very likely including the cost of funds, so where the money comes from. Probably it's a bank loan with interest. So, but the important thing is the private party would be happy to do that, but they need to be sure that they are remunerated. They're getting their money back. That's their motivation. So how this is done, private sector remuneration, you have basically two different approaches, two different structures, fee structures in PPPs. One, the UK started with a PFI model, the availability payments. Russia and many of the emerging markets would start with concessions, with user fees. So where funding is coming from, remuneration, let's first look at, let's say, availability payments. So you have the private party operating the asset. And let's say there are no tolls on this road. You have a road, but it is the government that pays the private partner. So when you have year one, and this is a 3-lane road, and all 3 lanes operate successfully, you have all the maximum amount per contract paid to the private operator. But if one of the lanes is unavailable, for some reason, there are potholes, there is some technical issue, the government understands that the asset was not available, not fully operationally available for the public. So there will be the deduction. So that's one of the mechanisms to make sure that there is incentives with the private operator to work efficiently in the operation stage. They rectify the problem, they make sure all lanes are available, and they get the full payment. They receive the full amount. So that's checking against performance indicators. That's one of the very important specialty areas in structuring PPPs, your performance criteria, and tweaking, subtle tweaks to these indicators can mean a lot to the bottom line of the project. You can measure it in terms of availability of all lanes, minimum travel time. Is in this example of a road, is the private partner doing a good job in terms of efficiently managing the lanes? So maybe you need a special lane for buses, and that would allow large buses, maybe heavy-duty vehicles, not to block the other lanes. So there is a great deal of freedom from the private partner to offer solutions, most efficient solutions. And that's the huge benefit of PPPs. There is competition. So when you have a tender, you invite different type of solutions for your requirements. And some people could say, for instance, will come with ideal variable speed limits for different lanes, for different solutions. Limited number of road crashes. That's another example of output criteria. So you don't measure we need 7 lanes with this type of width and this type of speed as a maximum speed limit for these lanes. You have the what are you after? You are after safety. So you say, for instance, the generally acceptable, or let's say realistically unavoidable number of road crashes on average is this. And if you exceed this number of road crashes, you are getting penalized as a private participant. So that incentive makes the private participants think and look for better solutions. So you could argue that this is not the feature of your typical traditional procurement. When I wouldn't like to use the word bureaucrat, but you have your silos, your area of responsibility, and you behave usually defensively. You make sure you don't make mistakes, but it's difficult to make sure that there is a public sector organization as a whole is motivated to look for most efficient solutions to achieve the final outputs, because there is no financial incentives. So user fees is a different type of structure. So in this case, the public let's say every 6 months or every month, whatever the PPP agreement says, the public sector would pay the private partner a full amount or amount with a deduction. So user fees is your typical structure as a concession, where the public sector, the government, gives a private partner the right to operate an asset, to create and operate an asset, which is typically a public sector responsibility, like a road. Again, a road, but a toll road. You would have toll booths. And one of the key contributions from the public sector here is giving the right to collect money. So you give the right to commercialize an asset. So then the users would pay the money to the private operator, and you don't need so much of monitoring work. This is a strong incentive. If the private operator finds that the road is not fully available, perhaps they would switch to a free road, which is less congested. If they find that travel time is very low, again, it would drive users away from your toll road. And of course, if a certain road is known to be not safe, because let's say there's not enough lightning in the darker time of the year, or the road is not sprayed with some chemicals to avoid it being slippery, so that with time, people will start avoiding it. The usability of the road will go down. That's a very strong incentive. So these are two different ways of having the financial skin in the game, either in availability payment structure, known as PFI, because this is the way the UK started a private finance initiative. Even this word private finance initiative, it was basically the UK government was saying we needed to finance construction, build more hospitals for us. We'll bring the doctors. The NHS have a lot of doctors. The UK educational system have a lot of teachers. We can reassign them, we can hire more, but we need you to build the buildings and to upkeep them. That's why PFI is availability payments, because the private party would not collect money from users, as opposed to different user fee structures, primarily concession. So I'm just also looking at the some of the feedback in the chat, and I quite agree with what Vasilis is saying, that traditional procurement has little effect on outcomes, as you cannot frame a procurement exercise to deliver results accurately, though there are some modern ways to tackle that. Yeah, and we'll mention that there is this very interesting process of demonstration effect. So once the PPPs or the privately owned infrastructure achieves something, very often the public sector then will say, well, that was not so difficult to do, and why don't we do the same? So sometimes these incentives develop, lead to discoveries of things that the public sector didn't have incentives to think of, but they are easy to replicate. One of those examples would be with prison services. I'm not sure if any of the BSTDB member states have prison services as penitentiary systems as a typical infrastructure service for PPPs, but it was one of the typical ones in the UK when it started. And this output-based incentive structure, just there was this line of saying reoffending rate. Reoffending rate was one of the criteria that the partner was assessed. Basically, the government was monitoring so people who were convicts in a PPP prison, how likely they are to get back to criminal ways after they've done their time in prison. So if it was above national average rate, the private company would be penalized, would have a deduction from their availability payment. If it was better, there would be an extra payment. So that made the private partner think of ways to reduce reoffending rate. And the solutions they came to were not very difficult to think of. It was hiring some psychologists to speak to the inmates, and education programs. So that was a very successful scheme of some vocational training, particularly IT. It was late 1990s, early 2000s. So many of the people of the convicts got their IT courses, learned to program, just do some IT work. And after they've done their sentence, more of them than national average never got back to criminal ways. And when that was discovered, a lot of the public system prisons introduced the same measures. These are not something very difficult to arrange. You have a lot of these courses that could be run remotely. And on average, the crime reoffending rate in the UK and some other countries dropped, including public sector prisons. So yeah, traditional procurement could pick up some of the lessons learned from PPPs, from the private investment in infrastructure. So we're moving to the second point. We compare PPPs and traditional procurement, duration. So we know that traditional procurement, the engagement with relationship with the private contractor is very short. You only hire the contractor to build an asset. That's the end of construction. That's the 2 years, for instance, to build a road, 1 year. That's it. No more role for the private sector. Whereas PPPs are medium to long term. So it usually includes the operational phase. Then it is essential what the scope of the PPP project, of course, is. Does it only include maintenance, or does it include provision of the service? But this way or the other, the private sector partner is involved until commissioning, until handover of the asset. It could be 20 years. We will take a PPP project as a case study throughout this course of Pulkovo Airport in Russia, a PPP project with a 30-year concession. So yeah, that's the difference. the contract in terms of involvement of private sector, PPPs are long-term. Then we move to this, something we already touched upon when we discussed the prisons by way of an example. Output versus input, that's a huge element of a PPP. We could also add another word on this slide, bundling, the bundling effect. As you know, bundle is like a big package. So PPP would include construction, and a typical full-scale PPP would include your design and construction and maintenance and operation. So you have, you want people to come in and compete for a full package of work for constructing an asset and running an infrastructure service. And when someone is responsible for pretty much everything, it's important what they are responsible for. You, as a traditional procurement, you would provide all the inputs. You would say, I need this road, this number of lanes, this so wide, this number of kilometers, and you would prescribe everything: road surfacing, materials and design, how many lampposts, how many barriers, everything. Whereas in a private participation, you have a chance in this to take maximum advantage of this bundling effect by telling not what you do and how, not telling how you do something, but asking prescribing what you want to achieve. You want a better ways of connection between 2 points. You want the drive to be safer, you want it to be faster, you want it to be more comfortable. So, and that's why you put out the outputs. You say you need road without potholes. And that leads the private sector to think of how to achieve those outputs, what choice of technology. And that's where the innovation, the creativity of the public sector, and of course supported by competition. And on every slide on benefits or comparisons of PPPs, you could always safely add the word competition, because again, that's a huge advantage of public versus private. Public, it could be it doesn't really matter public or private, is whether you involve competition. If you have a private group of companies, private company that just delivers work on their own without any bidding, it's certainly less efficient than when you have a global competition looking for the best solution. So outputs, as by way of say of another example, in any room you sit in, you could, if you want, for instance, if you're a hotel chain, if you're a hotel owner and you want to have a conference room, you could approach it by the inputs way. You would say, I have this room and I need 50 light bulbs, this type of light bulbs, and I need one big TV for presentations, and I need 2 microphones. So that's and then you made the decision. If it turns out that there's not enough, it's not light enough, it's too dark in the room, it's your problem. You have to pay for any changes. Whereas output, you would tell your contractor, you would say, I need this room to be good enough for people to work either as a conference where people sit around the table, or in a different arrangement as a banquet, and I want it to be light enough for healthy conditions to write, and I want every participant to have visibility of the screen. If you say what you want, not how to achieve it, and let your contractor come up with the solutions. Maybe they would argue that big windows are essential, or maybe they would use some more innovative lighting solutions. And there are ways to have either a big projector screen or a few TV screens on different walls. There are so many solutions. Let the different ideas be produced by your tender participants. Let them produce the best solution and be responsible for the final outcomes, not for the number of light bulbs. So we're moving to this key concept of risk, which cuts across every aspect of PPP. So we talk very often that the advantage of a PPP, the key advantage, and some of you outlined it in the reasons when you provided feedback in the chat. Transfer of risk, very often it's mentioned that transfer of risk is the advantage. And very often when you argue, your Ministry of Transport goes to the Cabinet of Ministers meeting and says, we want this done as a PPP. How do you argue that? Very often you say, we transfer a lot of risk, and you measure it financially. We say, because of the transfer of risk to the private party, this road will be cheaper than the publicly procured road. It's debatable whether this is a good line of arguments. And again, we're coming back to your feedbacks on what are the benefits. I would say that the main benefits of the PPP, the main reason, is they would produce a better infrastructure. It's not really about where money comes from, public or private. But if you have a better road, which serves its purposes better for the people, better standards of healthcare, and certainly and comparing it with like-to-like budgets, that's the advantage. So, but shifting risk is one of the, when you have to come up with something quantifiable, with a dollar amount to say why PPP, risk is usually the approach that you will take. So traditional procurement is mainly public sector risk. And as we discussed, risk is, when you say risk, you don't transfer risk, you basically transfer risk with money, with obligations. So if you're responsible for everything, for replacing bulbs, for all the maintenance work, for every time you need to repair something, so this is your risk. If events happen, negative events that disrupt operation, you have to pay for putting it back to normal. Whereas PPP says that the private sector takes some of the risk, the public sector transfers some of the risk to the private partner. So an example, and a very good graph to see it, is your when you have your this part we already looked at in one of the previous slides. Your traditional procurement, you pay for the construction, and then you pay for the operation and maintenance costs. Whereas a PPP way, let's say this is like a PFI scheme, the private partner comes in and they pay this amount for what the new school building is worth. You don't pay it. But then the tariffs paid by the government are higher, as we discussed, because there is the construction component to it. So, but that's not only the complete, that's not the complete picture. When we compare traditional and PPP way, it's every time when you argue, say in your dialogue with the Ministry of Finance or with the Cabinet of Ministers, never compare traditional procurement and PPPs only on the basis of construction cost. It's always taking into account all costs in the life cycle of the product. And then this, you never forget about operation and maintenance costs, because you can get it wrong, either too much helping the traditional procurement way or too much helping the PPP way because tariffs will be higher. But look here, the risks here of the traditional procurement route. This red area is things that may happen, not necessarily, but are likely. And in the risk session, we will have the statistics that would say they are almost guaranteed to happen, because the big type projects, particularly ones which are over $1 billion over 3 years to achieve with complex organizational interfaces, it's a very rare event that a project is being constructed without a cost overrun and without time delay. And time delay, of course, is money. Every additional day of construction, you have to pay your construction contractor. So if it is your traditional procurement, it is for the public side to fill in all these additional costs, cost overrun, commissioning, your construction additional expenses. And the same, the cost overrun could happen in the operational phase. You could cost more for maintenance than you expected. You could have more expenses for operation than you expected. Whereas your PPP way, if your contract says that the private party is responsible for the commissioning date, if the object is the asset is not ready for commissioning on the date that you have in your PPP agreement, it is for the private party to supplement it financially. Moreover, if they go out of, beyond the budget, but if there's a delay, not only they will pay for additional construction time, but you will have sometimes you have penalties, not only liquidated damages just to genuinely cover the additional costs, but there will maybe penalties because you, as a public sector, you promised the public to have this road operational 1st of October. If it starts operations 1st of December, you failed your voters, your citizens. So it is the risk borne by the private party. And same relates to operational maintenance costs. It is the risk borne by the private party. So this picture is a strong sell for the PPP option. On a more detailed level, very certainly this picture is very helpful, but not very detailed. It just gives you the basic understanding. What it doesn't capture is, if we were in a live audience, I would have asked you to, well, is this guaranteed for the government? I'm sure the government will not pay anything else. There would be no red line here. Well, it is possible that the red line will appear because there could, first of all, these are what's known as direct liabilities. So the government knows how much it has to pay. It is all planned. Very often the PPP agreement would have the tariff prescribed for the duration of the concession, of the PPP deal. You have schedule of 30-year payments, but there may be what they call contingent liabilities. So what happens if the project, if the private party fails, if there is a bankruptcy, if they collapse? So the public sector will then, that's the essence of an infrastructure asset. You can't say that, okay, well, the private party just had a bankruptcy and they have their unfinished road to build. No, it is you as a government to finish building the road. So there is this risk, retained risk, what we call a contingent risk. Some cases that a risk may realize, and it's very important, often not realized by the governments. It's something that I believe the National PPP Center is helping the Russian government today to to come up with how much of this contingent risk, contingent liabilities we have accumulated in the PPPs. That's kind of a nuance, but overall, this is a strong case to say that shifting risk to the private side is a key advantage of PPPs and the big differential of PPPs versus traditional procurement. So, well, we are saying moving risk, but how much of risk? That's the key area for how the PPP agreement is written, drafted, and how the negotiations go along. There is this phrase known to everyone in the risk management profession: allocate the risk to the partner best equipped to handle it, to manage it. What does this mean? The party best equipped to handle it. There's at least two aspects to it. One, it's like a mantra, like party best equipped to manage the risk. First of all, is the party that will be more resilient to risk. So the party which is less, which can, if there is an event, and this party would know what to do, it will not collapse. If a certain risk can collapse one party and will not really ruin the other party, give it to the one which is more resilient to it. And secondly, the party that can better influence, that can better lead to, can manage the risk, can, if you, for instance, if construction is done by a private contractor, there's no reason to argue that the public party should retain construction risk. Well, as a private partner is responsible for construction. You contract an EPC contractor. It is for you to establish all the criteria or the discipline of this construction, so you know how to make sure how to try to avoid a certain risk happening. And so that's of course then this risk should be transferred to the private party for construction. So that's the four key different aspects that differentiate PPPs versus traditional procurement, and we try to argue that on each of these, where money comes from, duration as the length of interaction between public and private, outputs and bundling, output performance and contracting and bundling of work in a single contract, and risk sharing. All these are advantages of PPPs. So when we move to the benefits, so we touched it, assessing private capital. It certainly is not free. It's a false perception that PPPs are free. You have to pay back, but the upfront cost is likely to be borne by the private party. This is what I believe is the most important, realizing real efficiency gains. So real efficiency gains in terms of life cycle cost, innovational, additional revenue. They can for instance, looking at airports. That's an example of we saw that in this Pulkovo airport that we will be discussing. Usually, the public party knows that the airport is there to provide aeronautical services. So people take their flights and they pay for tickets. They pay to air companies, and these air companies, the Aeroflots, the Alitalias of the world, the Lufthansas, they pay for the airport for all those aeronautical services. But your PPP private project, it will probably more efficiently tap into the additional revenue streams. So you have these concessions, your duty frees, your taxi stands, your cafes, everything. It turns out that non-aeronautical revenues can become a very important part of the overall profitability of an airport, additional revenue streams. So this realizing efficiency gains, again, if we look at this life cycle costs, this approach, you understand it. Looking at the toll road example, so you have your upfront investment coming from in a traditional way. Traditional is in gray. So you could. That's why I argued strongly. If you compare PPPs and traditional, don't just compare the construction cost, because construction cost is likely to be cheaper for the traditional procurement, because first of all, money is cheaper. There is no private sector rates for borrowing from banks, but also there's no technological innovation. There's no sophisticated technology of methods here. Whereas the PPP way, a private partner is likely, first of all, yes, they will pay more for borrowing from banks, but also they are likely to think in life cycle cost terms. They are incentivized to think of life cycle term costs. They are responsible for the maintenance and operation of the road for 30 years. So they would consider, can we use some materials, some solutions, technological, operational, managerial, to make this, to invest a bit more at the construction stage, but then pay less at the maintenance and operational stage. So in PPPs, both construction and operation costs are taken into consideration, and the cheapest one over the life of the asset would win. So if you put all the gray ones one on top of the other, in this illustration, they would be higher, more expensive than the green ones. And I want to give you an example, like a case study of a product that we over technology. It's a specific product, Durafalt. There are others, Everfalt and etc. But that's something which we see now being considered by the Western high-speed toll road in Russia, the most expensive toll road in the world. When it was built, it is a PPP. So the majority of road infrastructure has asphalt surfaces, and asphalt is 94% of aggregates and 6% of bitumen binder. So this 94% is still probably almost indestructible, but it is wear and tear of this bitumen binder, the 6%, that causes potholes, this road deterioration. So the traditional way to approach it is doing major maintenance, doing first of all, doing smaller repairs to potholes. So there is a certain cost to do those smaller repairs. And then once deemed beyond repair, the asphalt is milled 30 to 50 millimeters. So 3 to 5 centimeters of road surface is taken off, thrown out, and replaced. A new asphalt is being laid. And that's usually done. These figures, pictures and figures come from the UK experience with a quite moderate climate. So on average, it is like 10 years major maintenance. But in harder climates, like at St. Petersburg, it would be more often. So that's a traditional way, which is costly, disruptive to the surface, to road users' safety, and it's damaging to the environment. You replace this every few years, you throw away a certain amount of asphalt. Whereas you can see on the left, this is your average costs. So your initials, you would have the traditional one, and when you use this innovative coating, so the initial surfacing of the road is the same, but then after year 3, year 5, you apply this coating, and it costs some money. You don't have this in the traditional way, so you can argue that you start building costs here, which are additional. It will be your green bar on the graph, which is higher than the traditional one. But then gradually you start seeing the growing efficiencies. Year 9, you start having pothole repairs on average 240 pounds per square meter. And then you don't have these with this coating. You just keep reapplying it every few years, and you don't have the resurfacing works. Resurfacing works are expensive, and you have them at currently 1280 pounds per square meter. So your total cost over 30 years, if you look at this, that's all to illustrate the lifetime costs, is 45 pounds 60 pence, whereas with this innovative technology, you have 1260, which gives you a saving of a 74.2% reduction in asphalt maintenance costs. So it's a huge saving that you achieve just by taking the lifetime outlook. And again, this is not something very sophisticated. We already see some demonstration effect when some of the traditional publicly procured roads are now trying to introduce these innovative coatings. So that's to illustrate the benefit of whole life costs. So that's risk transfer that we already attached, protection versus cost overruns. If your private party responsibility, the private party deals with it. Your guarantee of funding for maintenance, it's for the private party to decide. So these are the benefits of the PPPs. But there are, of course, some limitations as well. Limitations which would we should be open about that. PPPs are not suitable for all projects, though I admitted that there is this drive for using PPPs to almost everything. But essentially, PPPs do not work well with projects with, for instance, with fast technological change. And IT is an area where one should exercise caution at applying PPPs to IT. If you capture a private partner in a 15-year contract for some IT system for issuing passports, but it's likely that in 5 years there will be, I don't know, an absolutely different technology, scanning the retina of your eye, and there will be total technological change. So PPPs with their long-term perspectives are not ideal in that respect. So another complex high transaction costs. Yeah, you should be aware of the fact that there is a lot of analysis, there's a lot of role for consultants to play, a lot of time spent on negotiation. So all of these aspects say that there will be quite a much higher, considerably higher transaction costs in PPPs as compared with traditional procurement. Yes, they will lead, they're most likely to lead to better outcomes, but upfront there is a high cost. Then you have your fiscal direct and indirect liabilities, something that we mentioned, your subsidies, your availability payments, your indirect liabilities like guarantees, contingent liabilities, very important to capture the total exposure of the public sector to PPPs so that you don't suddenly realize that you've run out of your department or your national budget. And there are cases, a famous hospital in Lesotho, South African country, one landmark project, one amazing hospital, almost bankrupted the country. It's a very exciting one to read about. Of course, political and social sensitivity in some countries, as they say, the cabinet that says they will abolish National Health Service in the UK is guaranteed, to be thrown out by the people, and using for services that are traditionally free can be quite problematic. And even learning that someone gets dividends and gets paid well for just providing the same medical treatment can lead to media sensationalism, can lead to negative publicity. So it's a touchy area. Limited flexibility. That's true. This bundling effect that I just praised to you, it allows you a lot to achieve a lot in terms of better solutions, whole life costing. But on the other hand, you may wish to, if you're captured in a 30-year concession for an airport, maybe in 10 years, this operator that was the Changi, the Fraport, the leading ones globally, maybe in 10 years, some things go horribly wrong with them, and their quality of work is not so good, and you really wished you could run another tender and choose another operator, but they're captured for 30 years. You're captured as well in this 30-year contract. So there is limited flexibility, and sometimes your anti-monopoly, your competition authorities, they take a very hard view on that. They're asking why we can't choose the best party to come up with a design, the best party to construct, the best party to operate. So you have to weigh these. For some types of work, for some types of services, you're better suited with contracting them traditional way, but then you would not, in large infrastructure projects, by and large, the benefits of whole life costing probably would exceed this loss in terms of flexibility. So if you have any questions, please make sure to drop them in your chat windows. Either Remir, do we have any questions?
Yes, we have.
We should address in this session.
Yes, we have very interesting questions and comments from our participants. And if I don't mind, I would like to answer the one from the Alexander about the recommendation to the G20. He's asking about strategic 25 recommendation to the G20 made by business leaders from the Business 20 group this Monday. I took a quick look at this document and can comment on it. Let me remind that each of 25 these recommendations was divided into 3 key areas: empowering people, protecting the planet, and shaping new frontiers. If we are talking about the people's empowerment, the business group made 10 recommendations, calling for increased among the all funding economic diversification, including inside job creating sectors as tourism. It should be mentioned that tomorrow we will talk about the results of that interesting survey. And according to the responses from PPP practitioners, tourism is no longer a priority sector for PPP. No longer. It could be a challenge for all of us. The second area, safeguarding the planet. The B20 made 3 recommendations to stimulate growth within the planet. Personally, we have nothing against any of them. Moreover, PPP projects, we make decisions that meet environmental standards, such as equator principles. We will also talk about this a little bit later, maybe tomorrow, maybe in the evening. And third area, the forming new frontiers. It's very interesting that B20 made an additional 20 recommendations focusing on improving the working environment on the high-tech sector. They recommended investing in digital infrastructure such as 5G, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Things. Yes, investment in IT technology as a PPP is very actively discussed. In my own opinion, based on my own experience, neither the government creditors nor sponsors have yet had sufficient experience in structuring this type of projects as a PPP. So this is a few ideas from myself to Alexander about the G20 and the recommendation from the business group of 20. Thank you, Sergey.
Thank you, Remir. Yeah, these drives from the OECD, G20, G8, G7, G8. They are sometimes they lead to some buzzwords, and we have to wait, and some of these buzzwords need to prove that they will stay for a long time. So it is now sustainable development goals, now people first, PPPs, all of the logic behind it is absolutely correct, but ultimately it is the market situation when you see how much of the governments highlight the importance of these areas, and we'll see whether the demand and supply of solutions like this, a response to this to this adequately. But I quite agree that the PPP model being very complex, but the experience is accumulating, and now public authorities globally, the private sector is better equipped to apply them to even to faster technological change sectors like IT, and of course, development banks play a big role in that as policy lenders. They invest some of their money, some of their sponsors' money in creating those instruments, making them available. So yeah, it's quite exciting to see. I'm just wondering what slide is. Can you getting back to the next session slide? Yeah, quite exciting to you probably will dwell more on this aspect in your presentation, speaking about standard PPP contracts. That's one of the areas to make it easier for PPPs to be applied to different sectors, to create boilerplate contracts that could be used for negotiations. So we're moving to the models of PPPs. We'll try to spend some 15 minutes on that, then maybe some 10 minutes on a case study of Pulkovo project, and have some 10-15 minutes for discussion. So you may have come across a great deal of acronyms that signify PPPs, and they seem to be different. BLT, PFI, BLT, DBFM. What are they? So some talk about ownership, others talk about what type of work is being done. So what are these all about? Can be quite confusing. And I remember, I know the Russian experience best of all, and I remember the PhD thesis on PPPs. When just PPPs started, there was a few years that the most popular topic of books, publications was PPP models, and because it was people just touched this new area, and they were saying, the difference between BOT and BTO is this. Now that the market is much more educated, there's much greater capacity in the private and public sector, that topic doesn't capture that much attention. The important thing is, what are you trying to achieve? What comes into your contract? What type of arrangement from this very flexible instrument of PPP you need? And then how do you find the right model for you? So one of the ways of seeing what these models are like is to pay attention to, first of all, how much of obligations, of So what's being done? How much, starting with the public sector does it all, and public sector transfers more and more obligations and risk to the private sector. And correspondingly, private sector, first of all, public sector pays for everything, and then public sector shifts risk and the financial responsibility, the investment to the private sector. And there are ways, different tables, ways to show different type of structures. You could have construction here, just at the very bottom. You have management, operation maintenance, building rehabilitation, and finally ownership, privatization. We'll touch each of these now briefly. So starting with the ones with more of public sector engagement and moving then to ones with more private. So management is, so you have an existing asset. So for instance, water sector, water treatment plant or water networks, which already belong to the public sector. And you only have your private partner coming to manage a public facility. It will be performance-based. So they don't invest, there is no capex they bring in, no private capital investment. But it is performance-based. It's not just do this work and we pay you on the cost plus structure. Performance-based is better. It's already a more advanced way of dealing with the scope. So that gives some incentive for efficiency gains. So you have your, if there is no leakage, or there's leakage reduction, for instance, in the water sector, that would lead to bonuses for exceeding targets. So there is a certain efficiency gains mechanism in terms of private sector remuneration. That's the benefit, and also that type of contract could be useful for a simpler, shorter term arrangement where you don't have the private sector bringing their capex. That's why there is no growth of customer tariff. You don't have your public being shocked by higher bills for water, which sometimes a full-scale PPP in water, you would have to agree a step up on tariff for quite a few years. So this you basically can stay within the original tariff. That's good. So this kind of model, the advantages are potential operation gains, lower complexity, quick implementation. It's not no construction to discuss, less politically sensitive because there is not a significant risk of tariff growth. The disadvantages, it is feature of the existing infrastructure. You don't utilize the capacity of the private sector to construct new assets. Very limited transfer of risk, including commercial risk. So you can't transfer the risk of collecting of tariffs or providing better service and charging more for it to the private sector. Your public sector remains responsible for it. No additional funding provided. Yeah, you still have to, if you need to construct a new water supply network, it is for the budget to pay for it. So that's this type of model. We're not saying it's bad, but it's a more basic type of involvement of the private sector. Then you have your more sophisticated operation or maintenance involvement. When you have a longer, that was a shorter term, 2 or 3 years. This is a longer term arrangement where the private sector takes on the maintenance and sometimes the operation role as well. And you have, let's say, a leasing arrangement, quite typical for seaports. So you would have your government, local authority, port authorities, they would grant a lease to a private operator, maybe 20, 30 years. I know that currently it's one of the PPP deals actually developed in Ukraine. So you have your private participant investing, buying some handling equipment, investing in port infrastructure, not necessarily building new berths, but definitely buying handling equipment. So the government, as a lease, allows the private operator to monetize the asset, to commercialize the asset, to charge fees from the user. So after the asset was used, it will be returned to the public sector, and the public sector is likely to retain a serious oversight role, because it effectively gives the private operator a monopoly position. So to avoid him abusing it and charging unreasonable fees, so this could be a regulated type of activity. So that's, and we discussed, so the government does not provide capital investment. That's the advantage of this structure. You have the private operator buying all the cranes and renewing the infrastructure. And then, of course, there is a lease fee. Every year, the private operator pays the government. So that's an obvious advantage. And then you have something we basically analyze, road maintenance. When you have a contract, performance-based road asset management and management contract, when you don't have the per unit price, you don't, the private operator does not provide you a bill for, we filled in 70 potholes this month. It is, the government pays a certain amount and says, we tell you that there is the output that we captured in the contract. Potholes bigger than a certain diameter must be filled in within 2 or 3 days. They're dangerous. So that's transfer of risk. If you don't fill it in within this number of days, the private contractor maintenance contractor gets penalized. But that leads to efficiency gains. Monitoring remains very important for this type of contract. So if we move back to the pros and cons of such contract, what they are good at is they provide incentives for efficiency and high sales, like leasing. O&M risk is transferred. The government is not responsible for operation and maintenance risks. So if the maintenance contractor has not provided some innovative solutions, some long-term solutions, it's for them to take the financial hit for this. On the other hand, it is yes, we're saying that in the sea container terminal context, there is investment, but this is not the scale of investment of building a new seaport. It's mainly building new equipment. The government still stays quite actively involved as a regulator, keeping oversight over tariff arrangements. And of course, when you take over an asset that you have not built, there is reluctance to maintain an asset. And there was no, to give an example, you all heard of the bridge that collapsed in 2018 in Genoa. 34, 43 people died. It was a PPP, but the thing is, the bridge was constructed 70 years ago. And at that time, it was a state-owned enterprise. The same name then became privatized. But of course, at that point, there was no thinking of maintenance. Maintenance was not part of the mentality. The mentality was build it cheaper. The feature of that bridge was they saved a lot on steel, though there was a lot of use of concrete rather than steel. It was admired as a cheap decision, and the discussion still goes on. What was the reason for this collapse of the bridge? But the main argument is there was not sufficient maintenance work. There was not sufficiently deep analysis of the construction of the state of this bridge, and it, to a large degree, it goes down to this governance issue. So who was responsible? Was there a financial motive or not for the private party to think of maintenance when they constructed it? It was not there, and arguably it was one of the reasons that led to oversight in terms of maintenance and led to tragic consequences. By the way, the Italian, I think Liguria is the province, they're now talking about using these innovative coatings to protect the surface, because now they're thinking in long-term costs, that spending more for these 3 millimeters of surface now to stop water from getting inside the construction and deteriorating the material. Spending more now would lead to better outcomes over the lifetime. So then we move to this building rehabilitation contract. So when you have that's what we already discussed: availability, user fees, models. But that's when you add building. But when you have someone do the construction for you, that's where you have those benefits captured. When you know that you do construction and keep being responsible for maintenance and maybe operations. So as the availability model, typically social infrastructure, healthcare, your regular payments come from government and you monitor against. Performance indicators in your user fees models, like a toll project, build, operate, and finally transfer for the right to collect fees from users. So this is your sometimes it is called the acronyms would go to name the functions the private sector participant plays. DBFMO would be a complete set: design, build, finance, maintain, and operate. So this is like a full set of advantages captured in this sophisticated type of contract. So you have your advantages are private investment, money comes from the private sector, significant risk transferred to the private operator. There is potential for efficiency gain, something that in my individual personal view is the key advantage of PPPs, real efficiency gains. On the other hand, it's complex to implement and administer. Infrastructure, PPPs are all about implementations. It's not only long negotiations, but as a public authority, you have to make sure that you have a strong team that stays on top of this project throughout its lifetime. And the banks, of course, you don't walk away after you've signed a deal. You have, it was one of the criticisms for my management in the Eurasian Development Bank when we signed the Pulkovo deal and moved to the Western High-Speed Toll Road. My deputy chairman of the board told me, "Look, you've just signed this deal. Why do you keep, discussing it on the credit committee?" First year of the life of the Pulkovo project, there were over 100 waivers and decisions to be brought to the credit committee. It's a complex project. You have to keep a lot of people involved at the implementation stage. Underlying fiscal costs and liabilities, yes, you shift a lot of risks to the private side, but ultimately you, if things go really wrong, and if the project collapses, if there's a major problem, like you may have heard of Carillion, the major infrastructure contractor in the UK, it was an admired company that ran PPP universities and built them and ran them. after they collapsed, for some reasons, the assets were to be taken over by the state, and suddenly the regions of the national level had to come up with huge amounts, but that were not budgeted for. So that's your hidden and not visible liability. And of course, negotiations will take long place. So these are the cons to consider when you go for PPPs. And we move finally ownership. Ownership is your either privatization of an existing asset that was publicly owned, or you move to, or you start a new project which is finally not being transferred to the public sector. And some of these, you have one of those acronyms was BOO, build, own, and operate, without T, without transfer. So these are also legitimate PPP models, and in some cases, speaking for instance of IT, some asset may totally amortize over the life of the project. There is really nothing to transfer. So if you wish to keep running a certain service, you can do this as a private party, but your arrangement with the public sector is over. The public sector can provide this service independently, or go for another PPP or any type of contract. So some of the sectors are better fit for this. So when you don't transfer back the sector to public authorities, for instance, telecoms. Telecoms is an area, some jurisdictions are considered very typical for PPPs. In other, it is not typical at all for PPPs. It's considered to be an absolutely private sector dominant area. But these are sensitive. These are areas where the public sector has an important role. You probably, with mobile telephony, you can't say that your public sector bears responsibility for every citizen to have coverage nationwide. But for instance, the networks and the frequencies, these are things where the regulatory role of the public sector or the government will always be there. So the critical role of the public sector will remain either as an like electricity grid, like here as an off-take agreement. Also a pretty classical discussion in PPPs are if you have your power purchase agreement, your PPAs, are these PPPs or not? Some publications will say, yeah, these are typical PPPs. I feel they are typical PPPs if the public sector, if there is a partnership element, if failure of the project means that the public sector, the government will be, the owner of this problem and will have to somehow sort out what happens with this asset. But if it's only an off-take agreement, if the power purchase agreement only has the land provided by the state and has the obligations of the government to buy electricity into the grid at a certain tariff, well, it's pretty much private ownership, and it's a contractual arrangement with the government, but not really a partnership in my perspective. And as we discussed the telecoms, mobile telephony, there is a regulatory role ensuring sufficient competition, because otherwise it could lead to total abuse of monopoly power. So that's, and of course we realize it's a typical sort of exam question on those certified trading courses to make sure that trainees understand the difference between PPPs and privatization. Privatization is not a PPP because the asset has been built and belongs to the private party, which just acts commercially, and the government only takes some regulatory role, but is not a partner. So that's we've touched upon this type of structuring of different models. You can look at these models in a variety of ways apart from that. This comes from the APFG certified PPP professional book of knowledge. So the way you could look at PPPs, so where does the sort of funds come from? And then we say, yeah, you have user pays, like a concession, or availability, government pays, PFI. This is one way to look to slice PPPs. Another, ownership of the PPP company or the SPV. Conventional is totally private. You have institutional PPPs, a big area where the public side has a certain equity stake in the SPV. Other types of joint ventures. The scope of what we just discussed, the scope of objects. So what is the role of the private contractor? Is it focused on infrastructure development, construction and management? Is it integrated? Maybe it includes operation, or is just O&M or service PPPs. So you don't construct, the private sector is only operating the infrastructure asset. Financing mix, where does money come from? Conventional PPP with 100% private finance or co-financed? Public sector grants, as you will hear on Friday and the section of finance as well, is very often there is grant money and the various viability gap funds and various ways the public sector can financially support a PPP project. They are still PPPs. And finally, so what happens after the end of the PPP agreement term? Sorry, the previous use. Are these greenfield projects never constructed before? Are they brownfield projects? So you come to a location where there is already something working, and there's even a term, yellow field projects, ones that need to be redesigned. So let me then move that's the final slide before we move to the Pulkovo case study and your questions. So that's something for you to analyze maybe in detail. So that's, for those who are familiar with it, you know it all. For those who haven't yet been in a PPP, that's an intensive slide with key parties to a typical deal and types of documents and interactions and the stages. So what happens? So you have, of course, this is you are the public authority, you're the public partner, you come up with a project, you tell what you need, and you look for this via a bid for a private partner, for this investor, so the private partner to sign the PPP agreement with, and it's called SPV, Special Purpose Vehicle. We'll touch upon that in further lectures. It's important that it is just a company incorporated just for this one project. It has its equity investors, your shareholders that own this SPV. As a stage one, after bid award, the SPV award would be established. The commercial close is signing of the PPP agreement. Then very likely the money would come from banks. So there is a very important area of negotiations with banks signing financial agreements between SPV and lenders. Could be banks, could be bondholders, and then sometimes it's called upstream. This PPP agreement is an upstream contract. And then you have your downstream contracts, what the SPV enters into contracts with its own contractors on construction, EPC, with operation and maintenance. So then you have your construction works as the next stage, operations, and then if it's a user paid structure, you have your users paying money, and finally, and of course, loans, debt is being repaid until full maturity, and then you have your final handback. That's basically the key participants and the life of the PPP contract. And to illustrate it, we'll move to a project that is so well known in Russia, that probably is the best known project in Russia, I think, in all post-Soviet geography. It was the first PPP deal in the Russian Federation, and probably still the most successful, at least one of the most admired ones, building a new airport in the city of St. Petersburg. And you can read some, I won't dwell a long time to tell how magnificent the city is. What's important, it is the world's leading cultural city destination, #1 globally for 5 last years, ahead of Paris, London, and Bangkok and others. So it is a lot of, it has a lot of international travel. Let's just illustrate that. And this is it was a 30-year public-private partnerships agreement with the city of St. Petersburg. It used to be, at that time, it was an old, absolutely insufficient airport for the growing public wealth of Russian population, and for more international travelers coming to St. Petersburg to see the city. So the decision was not to pay money from the budget of the city, though the city had money, but it was a decision to make a landmark project, to bring the best of international experience. It was a condition for this PPP project to have international operator. It could not be a Russian, a local operator. It had to be international one to bring the best global practices. The government of the city provided assurances that there will be no new airport in St. Petersburg. They will not support any new airport in the city and in the neighboring region for 30 years, to make sure that this project has exclusivity, has the chance to recover the investment. But these kind of decisions allow the city to say, we are not taking the demand risk. It is the private operator to come up with 100% of investment costs, which was at about the construction cost was 900 million euros, and you will take the traffic risk, demand risk. The city is not responsible for anything to do with usability, rates, how much people pay, how willing the global travelers are to come to St. Petersburg. Moreover, the private partner would have to pay concession fees, about 2 million years, a fixed one, plus 11.5% of gross revenue every year. And this project allowed to make the airport one of the most admired in the world. The airport won lots of awards. You can see that physically when you go to this airport, you can't recognize it really. Those who were in Pulkovo years ago, the number of check-in desks, twice as the previous, contact stands, immigration booths. It used to be a very packed airport. Now it's beautiful and spacious. So a new terminal was built. I wouldn't bore you with all those technical details, just to tell you that there was an office center, a hotel, car park, and a lot of airside developments. So a lot of aeronautical focused services, but also a lot of commercial focus elements of this project. And it was the request of the city for the airport to be a beautiful one. So you see the architectural, the computer imagery. So this is what the architectural design studio, Grimshaw Architects, had this pictured. This is what we want this airport to look like. That was the idea. You see the roof with this shape and with lines of sky visible through these shapes to look like the canals of St. Petersburg. And this is what the airport actually looks like, basically exactly what it was according to the design. It's a beautiful airport. And this is the slide we will be using quite a lot during this presentation. The timeline has gives you so much information about this project. You will see, Remir tomorrow on Friday will talk about this early stages. So how the tendering, the 2007 and 9, this is 2 or 3 years, the city was hiring advisors, coming up with the strategic plan, developing legislation in PPPs to have this arranged. And then for us as the session organized by a bank, it's so important to see how many times you will see the word finance of banks feature. You have pre-negotiation with banks, negotiating the financial close next year, negotiating the financial close, and only here financial close achieved. You see 2009, 10, 11, 12, basically 3-4 years to negotiate financing the project. Why this happened? Why a role of banks was so critically important? And what I will argue is that yes, it took a long time, but that was so important. And the reason the financial structure was done right was critically important for the fact that the project happened, that it didn't collapse in 2013, 14, 15. And the final slide is here to illustrate the organizational complexity of the deal. So you have, as the deal was signed in 2009, so what the National Capital Highway, North Capital Gateway, NCG, is the name of the SPV. So we have the fund of the consortia members, VTB, the state-owned, the bank, one of the second largest bank in Russia, Fraport, the German renowned airport operator, and Kapiluzis Group, the investment group from Greece, who then hired the Turkish-Italian alliance to construct the airport. And you can imagine neither Fraport nor IC nor Astondi ever had a presence in Russia before. And of course, very important slide for us in terms of lenders. And you have this, of course, Black Sea Trade and Development Bank, I'm sure is proud to be one of the original lenders to the project, along as the famous EBRD IFC, the biggest Russian state-owned bank, development bank, Vneshekonombank, and 2 other regional IFIs, Nordic Investment Bank and Eurasian, and I used to work for this one. So it's 7 development banks that negotiated the deal, and during the syndication process, late in the game, 6 commercial banks participated as well. So this is to illustrate the complexity of this deal, and we'll analyze this wonderful project over all further sessions. This is just to say that it got lots of deals when it was signed, though there is the phrase curse over deal of the year. Usually deal of the year awarded to something very complex, very ambitious and exciting. That's why it is deal of the year. And the same reasons make this project risky. It's likely to have problems in the future. But this one managed so far to be pretty successful, and we'll discuss how. So that's the end of the slides. We have some, as long as we like, for questions, comments. So Remir, is there anything you've picked up from the comments in the chat?
Sergey. Yes, Sergey. We have a number of questions, and if you don't mind, just we will answer a number of them. The government agency can be a municipality, not only central government. can the local government be a government agency, state partner?
Sure.
Sergey?
Yeah, of course. When we say government, public, these terms are pretty much used interchangeably. The level of government, the jurisdiction, could be sovereign level. It could be regional. It could be municipal. And in every jurisdiction, you have different approaches to this. So, for instance, of course, this question maybe comes from Russia, where you have a municipal level is significantly different from regional and national. In other countries, the structure of territorial governance of the public sector may be different, but the important thing is, yeah, you can have projects on a regional, municipal, national, local basis. Sometimes you have this term subnational, so you have national and you have subnational level. The important thing is, of course, the lower you go, the more localized the project is. The smaller the capacity of the public partner is usually. Of course, the nationwide Ministry of Finance would be better financed, better equipped, would have a bigger budget. There are some exceptions. For instance, this coming back to Pulkovo, the city of St. Petersburg probably was a better counterpart in negotiations with better capacity than the Russian Federation as a nation. And it is a better, probably even have a higher credit standing. I wouldn't say rating. It is rated as the Russian Federation. But historically, when in 1998, the Russian Federation defaulted on its sovereign debt, St. Petersburg kept being current on the Eurobonds of the city. So you can argue that sometimes you have a better counterpart locally, but it's a rare kind of case. Usually there are challenges of dealing with municipal, regional area projects. Number one reason is financial capacity of the public sector. If it is an availability scheme, as a private investor, you will really look into the budget of this municipality. Do they have this money, and how do they secure availability of these funds for 30 years? And very often it is the higher levels of government they help. So you would have your region signing an agreement together with a municipality, or the sovereign level as providing support to a municipal project.
Thank you, Sergey. Thanks to Violet for that question. We have another question from Elmar. How to find a golden balance in the risk transfer of remuneration and user pay PPP projects, where the private sector requires guarantee for some stable revenue inflow, or in case of failure, government should bear major expenses or recover the loss?
Well, golden balance, I think, is determined by the competition and by negotiation. And if so, well, it will be good if the golden balance is found during the competition process. It doesn't always happen. There is a famous case of the Bangkok light rail train, where the Bangkok authorities thought it is the good case for all traffic risk, all demand risk to be placed with the private party. And there were bidders who were willing to take that risk. And it turned out it was totally not, they were unable to manage the project and were unable to cope with the demand risk. So all further extensions of the same light railway by the Bangkok authority happened. The public sector took the demand risk because the first experience was so negative. So we've seen so many of the deals where it is the sort of knee-jerk reaction of the public sector So if we go for a PPP, let's move the demand risk to the private party. Very often it is the public consultations, the road shows where you have the feedback from the potential consortium members, from lenders. They would tell you either this is not realistic, or the risk assessment will be so high that the project will be very expensive. So then it's important for the public authority to listen to this feedback and to reassess the situation if necessary, and maybe then, and of course there are a lot of elements to find a best structural solution. It's not like black or white, either public or private. You have your grants, you have your minimum revenue guarantees, you have a lot of subtle fine-tuning instruments to achieve the optimal balance.
Thank you. Going back to the previous question, Mr. Christakis from BSTDB commented that Istanbul municipality has got a high-level expertise in PPP. Okay, the next question is that Mr. Samolis indicated IT is a sector not advisable for the PPP. Of course, from international experience, there are cases of problem, especially due to obsolete technology in expanding internet access project via PPP modality. But with the current COVID-19 pandemic, digital economy become an important area for development. What can be recommendations and the best option in this field? Sergey?
Well, first of all, I know that there are PPPs, successful PPPs in in ICT. So I'm not saying that it's not advisable, but it's definitely not a typical area. Not only for reasons of life cycle and technological tempo of economic and technological change, but also quite often it's a very competitive private area where you could go for a lot of private buying private solutions, and of course the new environment calls for new solutions. I wouldn't be able to advocate like a silver bullet recommendation of potentially could sound like consider BOO projects. Consider projects which would not have a handback aspect, because, well, what do you do with obsolete software? Or consider opportunity of renegotiations, of replacing the like a kind of mandatory renegotiation points in the life of the contract, where you can, as a public authority, have a chance to replace the lender, better pay him back whatever is left of the life of the contract, and go for another solution. Each of these is to be approached on its merit, and I would say that even traditional, let me have a 1 minute on technological disruption. It's something which is little captured by any knowledge, by any publication. It doesn't really feature in any training courses, but even in traditional infrastructure projects, we have the rapid technological change, which can totally alter the demand. For instance, parking is a typical PPP project. Companies like Vinci, France, one of the biggest concessionaires in the world. If you go to airports, not only in France, in many areas, when you wait for your taxi in a car park, you will often see Vinci concessions. But imagine being captured in a concession on a parking. Airport is okay, but in the center of the city for 20, 30 years, where you have your Ubers and you have your driverless technologies, is absolutely no predictability whether demand for private cars to be parked in city center would be there in 5 years. So are the PPP contracts ready for these challenges? Is the only solution to terminate? What is the cost for the public sector to terminate? I'm sure that PPP lawyers and public authorities are thinking, and the COVID situation really makes it more topical of thinking of degrees of flexibility in PPP contracts.
Thank you, Sergey. The next question from Elmar. What are the main practical material differences or advantages, disadvantages for both sides between build, operate, transfer and build, own, operate, transfer modalities?
Well, ownership, I would say essentially would allow you to have a better use of your asset as a collateral when you talk to a bank. It may I could imagine this having a material role in terms of interest that your loan would command. So, but on the other hand, any use of PPP assets as collateral may be in a way a hypothetical exercise. In cases like toll roads, you don't even start discussing it. So toll roads, for that reason, very often toll roads are BTO structures. You transfer ownership of, basically the state owns the project, the asset at the moment it's being constructed. And it makes sense, because if what do you do with a totally privately owned road? It's something for the public to have and to run. So if you collapse, you can't really sell a toll road. But if it's a seaport, if it's a smaller size, kind of more tangible operation, when assets can be part of the collateral, and you can expect the banks to step in, to take over, potentially replace the land, the private party. I think ownership, in that respect, has some sense. So if you compare two scenarios where, at the end of the PPP agreement, anyway, the asset gets handed back to the public party, but who owns it along the way? I would say collateral probably is one of the reasons.
Okay, thank you. And a question from Elmar Zaev. How exchange rate risk was regulated on settled in the Pulkovo project, considering the major fluctuation in the local currency?
Yeah, that's you've Elmar, you touched one of the definitely would make the top 3, 5, top 2 risks for PPPs in economies, in jurisdictions which, for that reason, are not easy to cover the exchange rate risk. I would encourage anyone, if we have participants from Turkey or people from BSTDB who do work in Turkey, to drop a line in the chat line to help me understand why there is no great deal of exchange rate risk in Turkey if you compare it with Russia. In Russia, basically, you're stuck if you have a project with ruble revenues and you want to have an international financier with dollars or euros. You have to look for some market instruments, which can be very expensive. But why is it that in Turkey you have your lira-denominated projects and banks from all the world lined up to provide their euros and dollars and pounds? So in Pulkovo, one of the advantages of the asset was that about half of the revenues came from international destinations. So almost 50-50 rubles versus dollars, euros. So that was like a natural hedge. But still, the private partner went for a series of hedging swaps in the FX market. It was expensive, but it was necessary to make the financial structure robust. At the same time, the same 2008, first two concession toll roads were negotiated in Russia, and exchange rate risk was the break point where all the IFIs walked out. We had EBRD, IFC, EIB, everyone was willing to finance those roads. But when the Russian Federation said there is no way we will, it was the expectation of the IFI, so the Russian Federation will provide some state guarantee or some state kind of mechanism for making sure that they mitigating the exchange rate risk. It didn't happen, and the banks didn't participate. There's another notoriously well-known project in Russia, the Yanino-Levashovo waste management facility in St. Petersburg as well. The bid was won by a Greek construction engineering company, Actor Helektor, and it was just an FX risk. Well, there are many aspects to this, problematic aspects to the deal, but the foreign exchange risk always was the stumbling block, and the project never actually happened. Because for just final phrase, for a ruble revenue project, when you have the bulk of the capex is basically buying the facility, let's say in Germany, the sophisticated waste management plant, it is a euro-nominated expense, and with fluctuations in the exchange rate of a ruble by the factor of 200% over 1 year, 2015, for instance, it never happened.
Yeah, thanks. And Vasilis Christakis from Black Sea Trade and Development Bank added that BSTDB participated in the Pulko financing as well.
Oh yes, Vasilis, great, yeah. Yes. There was. It's so good to see. Of course, Leonid Sidarenko was the person we met most on during negotiations. But is it one of your favorite memories of PPP life? Did you find that project very difficult?
I joined after we started with the reporting, and I found the reporting structure very interesting. How the monitoring went. The monitoring went from a Northern Capital Gateway to the lender's advisor, from the lender's advisor to us, and then all the comments had to go vice versa. But it worked. So the lender's advisor sort of filtered whatever the construction reporting was and gave the gist to the lenders in a way that they could understand it. And that made it much more accessible. And that experience helped the bank also to participate actively in the 14 Greek regional airports, which is a big deal a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
One thing about the Greek airports, though, as opposed to Pulkovo, I also noted it. I just went to Thessaloniki airport 2 weeks ago, and it's very ugly.
Is it one of your program?
It's one of the 14, but I guess because it was a bulk requirement, and the bidders had to do one similar one for all, it became more like a standard type of construction rather than a particular construction that would cater to the city and its aesthetics.
Yeah, that's first on reporting. I remember there was this debate we had on the independent engineer and monitoring of the Pulko project, and it was a bit unorthodox decision, but to save money, it was decided that there would be one team of people who would monitor activities working for both the lenders and the investors. It's not typical, and in Remir's presentation on Friday, you will see the amount of first-rate advisors hired by all parties. The advisors made a lot of money, so it is a significant proportion of the project costs that went into advisors. And on beautiful airports, Pulkovo was reproached, particularly at the design stage, of being a gold-plated decision, and that was the wish of the governor of the day, Mrs. Matviyenko, to have a beautiful landmark architecture project. So it is a valid point for #1 destination in the world, but still, when lenders came to the negotiating table, there was a kind of a feedback to the city to say, look, the beautiful is beautiful, but there are metrics of how much you spend, how many passengers you have per square meter. And the initial design by the airport was too lavish. So the airport would not be utilized to close to capacity for a long time. So feedback from lenders led to the city to reconsider the design. That's something that the private party did not do, or was unable to convince the city to do. And of course there can be beautiful small airports. There are some group, I know in the regional southern Russian airports, it's their point that they're very economical, that they're very efficient, but it's sort of IKEA, kind of very clean, no unpleasant experience, but definitely not fancy.
Yes, thank you, Sergey. And last phrase. Today we had more than 40 participants from 15 entities, so it's quite good figure, Sergey.
Yeah, that's great, and then I really admire everyone involved, the Russian Federation, who provided this facility to BSTDB, who primarily BSTDB to because you know it's really these days it's I think with money being so cheap and because of COVID crisis and the public sector not being willing so much to put forward ambitious projects, there is this certainly the demand on the policy in lenders to help with the pipelines, to help with the capacity, and it's amazing to see. I used to work for a regional bank. I sort of understand the mentality. It's amazing to see that you're being so proactive in speaking to all of the member countries and helping them with that, because we work with the big guns as well, with the World Bank, etc. I don't see that level of, you know, very often it's still driven by the project, or you have a chance to get an advisory deal for this airport in that country. In that case, you will throw a seminar. Otherwise, no, you just, first you want the public side to promise. So what you're doing is admirable, and I hope there is this interest will generate something, you know, to keep building up capacity of the public sector, and it will lead to more better projects.
Yeah, thank you, sir. That's about all with questions and answers.
Yeah, if anyone wants to see, yeah, you can switch on Elmar if you switch your camera.
That's not from Sergey. Yes, first of all, I would like to thank you for the organization of this event, and it was very interesting, and we received very much information, especially study on Pulkovo was very interesting personally for me, and I hope it also was very interesting for participants as well. I also would like to special thanks Remir and Sergey you for the detailed answer to the questions, and I hope that my questions didn't get you. So I thank you.
Thank you. It is great that
thank you.
You're active, and I mean, for us, when we have the sessions live in physical environment, they are interactive, and we always welcome people's opinions. But one of the challenges of this new environment is sessions they are online and they have to be short. and you're all busy people working in your ministries, so you can't spend a week, 8 hours doing a good course. So unfortunately, we can't interact that much as we would like, but questions like this are very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd also like to add, Sergey, if possible, that coming up in more technical trainings in the next 4 days, colleagues of mine from financial analysis unit or from risk management or our bankers themselves will be able to chip in with more particular comments and put some light on various aspects that we have come up or they have come up to their expertise. So as to make this as interactive as possible, and would like to thank Elmar very, very much for his questions and for his proactive participation. Thank you, Elmar.
Thank you, you too. Thank you too.
Thank you, Vasilis.
And we hope to see 40 participants again on Friday, please.
Or more. Okay, so I believe then we should call it a day. So you have you'll have the slides, and see you on Friday, same time. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Sergey. Thank you, Remir.
Bye-bye.
Bye.